and I spoke about theoretical wars, and so now I speak about the real thing. That's field research. I think the situation here is so cozy and nice, I may sit down. Good, thank you. Okay, culture-specific forms of language use the Cook Islanders' control of public display of emotions. I will start this talk with 4 observations, which I made in my 1982-83 field trip. These were the first 2 field trips with just 1 month of coming back home, having a meeting with all the other people involved in the project, grabbing my wife, packing our things, and going back to the field again. Then I introduced the concept of ritual communication and elaborate on the role it plays for emotion control in the Tropic Islanders' public behavior. And on the basis of these insights, I deal with the social obligation to weep for a deceased person, first thing, then morals and manners prevailing for unmarried adolescents, then morals and manners prevailing for married couples emotion control, highlighting the importance of the Tropianers' concept of Piga Sopa, and then I explain why the Tropianers lose face when teasing provokes them. I end the talk then pointing out that control your emotions is a crucial maxim for the Tropian Islanders. And again, like in all the other talks, if I'm too fast, if I'm too slow, if you do not understand what I mean, just interrupt me and ask a question. Okay, I think most of you have seen this map. Is there anyone who hasn't seen it? So here in the audience? You have it?
She hasn't.
Okay, good. Then I come with my traditional introduction. This here is Queensland and Australia, and north of Australia we find the 2nd biggest island in the world, the island of New Guinea. New Guinea is divided into 2 parts. One is a part that was annexed in the 1963s by Indonesia from the Dutch, and it's called West Papua or Irian Jaya in these days. And the other one is Papua New Guinea, which became independent in 1975. So it's independent for quite a long time. Its capital is Port Moresby, and that is where I land when I go to the field. I first get my gear clear of customs, then I fly down to Alotau. Alotau is the capital of Milne Bay Province, which is the province in which the Tropian Islanders are situated, and I have to visit there the governor just to make sure that I get my research permits renewed. And then from there I fly out to the Tropian Islands, and now I zoom in on the Tropians. These are all the islands that belong to the Tropian archipelago. The main island is Kiribina. Kiribina has become very popular and very famous because of Bronislaw Malinowski's research there. He was working here in Umarakana, and he also stayed some time here in Sinakita. And Malinowski was the founder of modern cultural and social anthropology, and he did his field research there between 1916 and 1918. I'm not on the main island, I'm in the provinces. I come down here close to an airstrip to Oyubeyoba. Then I go down to Losuya, pick my dinghy, check whether the outboard engine is okay, see if there are people that come or want to go to Kaliuna, and then only with passengers. I never went alone. I go over from Losuya to Tauwima, that is the northernmost village on Kaliuna Island. It was my place of residence ever since 1982, and I ended my field research in 2012. The Tropian Islanders belong to the ethnic group called Northern Masim. They are gardeners doing slash and burn cultivation. They are excellent divers, very good canoe builders and navigators. Their society is matrilineal. That means no child is actually related to his or her father. It all belongs in the matrilineal line. But the rule of residence is very local. That means the family lives in the village of the father. The language is called Kilivila. It's an Austronesian language, and the Austronesian languages form the largest language family of the world, with 3,000 languages being members of it. And to come closer on the specificity of Kilivila, it's a West Melanesian Oceanic language belonging to the Papuan Tip cluster. And this was my house, one of my houses here, the central one, where you see the cursor now, in Tauwima, my village. Okay, the observations. On May the 28th in 1983, people came from the neighboring village Koma and told us that Yunavana had died. It was a very strange death because he was a young man, and people do not think that young people die without any kind of magical influence. So on our way to Koma, we were joking and gossiping with the people who said we have to go there. That would be a very interesting ride to see. We never had seen a morning ride there, and so we went with them. Then we realized that in Koma, in that village, the corpse was publicly displayed with valuables at his side. By the way, I was asked to make that photograph. I would never have dared to do it because out of field ethics, I was asked to do the photograph and to bring it with me next time I came. And in 1989, they got the photograph. Close to the platform, people stopped joking, and then they started to weep barrels. And after a few minutes of uncontrolled crying, they retreated, dried their tears, went to friends, and started gossiping and joking with them again. Strange behavior, wasn't it? How come? Okay, good. Next one, second one. Here I use pseudonyms. Duja and Jolina are protagonists in a very famous love legend of the Tropical Islands, a myth, a love myth. So I do not want to give away who they were. It was quite an open secret that Duja and Jolina had been very, very fond of each other for weeks, dancing and eating betel nuts together and suddenly vanishing late at night. Milamala, the harvest festival, had started, and a visiting party from Kaduaga, our other neighboring village, had arrived in Taurima, and all the youngsters, be it men or women, were dressed to kill. And in the evening, they joined the dances of Taurima. One man started to flirt with Duja, and the flirting increased, and they even shared a betel nut with each other, and then they went to the beach. Jolina observed this with anger and bewilderment. He was really grabbing his hands onto one of these big yam storehouses not to go away. He remained with the singers and dancers actually all night long. I had observed all this. Oh, thank you very much. I had observed all this, and the next day I asked my dear friend and neighbor and my weather magician Boyer how Jolina managed to control his jealousy, his emotions in this situation. He laughed to me and just said, Ekokola Baluma. He's afraid of the spirits of the dead. What does this mean? What does he mean that he's afraid of the spirits of the dead? Okay, another thing to find out. Third observation. Guyao, one of our really daring sailors, returned from a 2-month trip to the Amphiles Islands with his Masawa canoe loaded with clay pots. He landed the canoe close to his wife, who was cleaning stained aluminium pots. The couple didn't greet each other. They hardly deigned to look at each other. And after a while, Guyao's wife approached her husband sitting at his veranda and gave him a cup of tea without much ado, and then prepared their meal for dinner. They hadn't seen each other for 2 months. Strange way of behaving, isn't it? Okay, what? It's their way probably, so we had to find out what was going on. The fourth observation was probably the most dramatic one. Again, here the names are anonymizing. The names are the protagonists of the marvelous Tudava myth, Dokonikani and Tudava. In April 1983, Dokonikani tasted Tudava so severely that he lost his temper, ran to his house and fetched his bush knife and his fighting sticks to attack Dokonikani. Dokonikani had also grabbed his weapons, and his brother had armed themselves to protect him. One of Tudava's neighbors embraced him from behind and hindered him to storm towards his offender. He shouted at Dokonikani, but after some 5 long minutes, he calmed down. Tudava realized that he had wounded his neighbor. He had to dress him, of course. He vanished into his house and was not seen anymore for 6 weeks or so. He went to his gardens before dawn and returned after sunset. In May then, during a village meeting, he suddenly surfaced again, distributing heaps of betel nuts, also to Dokonikani and his brothers, who accepted the gift nonchalantly. This settled the case, and Todava had regained his face again. Now, what does it all mean? Let's look whether the idea of ritual communication can help us a bit more in answering these questions. Forms of ritual communication are pervasive throughout the Trojan Islanders' verbal and non-verbal behavior. What are the origins of these forms of ritual communication? Human ethologists, that is, people who scientifically research the behavior of humans, but also and other ethologists, behavioral physiologists look at the behavior of animals. But when human ethologists describe behavior patterns that have undergone distinctive differentiation in the service of signaling during processes of ritualization. Gestures are probably the best known forms of expressive movements that function as communicative signals. But there are many, many other forms of expressive behavior that are used in human communication. Among the most communicative of such behavioral signals are certainly facial expressions. Territorial behavior of humans expressed in personal distance, posture behavior, and body motion is another means of expressing communicative and interactional signals. Human ethologists argue now that expressive movements like those just mentioned have undergone distinctive differentiation in the service of signaling in phylogenetic and cultural ritualization processes. This means they are usually simplified, they are repeated rhythmically, they get exaggerated, and they have a very specific intensity. Thus, they contribute to making the behavior of interactants predictable and thus provide security and order in interaction. An important function of rituals is to create and to stabilize social relations. Social rites that serve the function of bonding and impression blocking are central with respect to human interaction. With humans, we observe ritualized patterns and forms of both non-verbal and verbal communication. The term ritual communication subsumes both patterns of behavior that function as signals which originate and have been generated in processes of ritualization. Now, anyone who wants to research the role of language, culture, and cognition in social interaction must know how the research society constructs its reality. He or she must be on common grounds with the research community. Thus, every speaker of a natural language must learn the rules of verbal and non-verbal behavior valid for her or his speech community. He or she has to understand and duplicate the construction of the speech community's common social reality, and the patterns and modes of behavior must be coordinated and harmonized too. Thus, the duplicated social construction of reality must also be secured and safeguarded with respect to possible sites of fracture, such as competition, cooperation, and conflict within the community. And this is partly achieved through the ritualization of communication, which can contribute to relieving tension in critical situations and to regulating social differences and dissensions by increasing the harmonizing function of speech, by creating and stabilizing social relations, and by distancing emotions, impulses, and intentions. Ritualizations of communication can increase the predictability of human behavior and open up space where behavior can be tried out without fear of social sanctions. Therefore, one can broadly characterize ritual communication as a type of strategic action that, among many other things, helps promote social bonding, blocks aggression, and dispels elements of danger that might affect the community's social harmony. It acts within the verbal domain by enabling people to voice these elements and bring them up for discussion. However, this does not always work. The duplication of the social truth of a locution does not always accord with either the speakers or the listeners' experiencing of that situation, or one alluded to in the locution. Aggression that might result from this failure is usually suppressed because of the strong societal requirement being nice, even when people do not feel at all that way. Thus, emotions can be claimed and voicing, can be calmed, and voicing can be repressed. A society as open as the Trojan one, which offers few closed personal spaces to ensure privacy, depends on its members having a strong sense of tact. Sometimes one has to pretend not to hear and not to know things, and one must learn at an early age that one doesn't talk about these things, though the atmosphere is often tense. The general requirement of tactful behavior, the necessity to be nice, and the positive and successful effects of ritual communication contribute to and create the necessary social harmony in a society such as the one of the Trobriand Islanders. Thus, the Trobriand Islanders' forms of ritual communication, the ways in which they ritualize their communicative behavior, play a central role in and for controlling the public display of emotions. Kilivila has a rich inventory of terms to precisely refer to and to differentiate emotions and inner feelings, as I pointed out 2 days ago. This reveals that Trobrianders are very much aware of various kinds of emotions and forms of their expressions in social encounters, an observation which both results from and confirms the impact of ritual communication for the social construction of reality. Now, on the basis of this insight, we can now go back to the 4 observations that I reported at the beginning of my talk and describe what is actually going on and why the interactants behaved or misbehaved in the way described. Now, the social obligation to weep for a deceased person. Whenever a person in one's village or in a neighboring village dies, the Trobrianders feel obliged to go to the house where the person is laying in state to bewail him or her. They refer to this behavior with expressions, "Bachalosi, bachabalamsi," we will go, we will cry. This obligation is even stronger in cases where the deceased person is a young man or woman. As I said at the very beginning of my talk, young persons cannot die a natural death. That's the conviction of the Trobriand Islanders. In these cases, sorcery and black magic must have been involved. Now, the communal crying displayed in very intense expressive patterns has the following important functions on the Trobriand Islands. The Trobrianders who cry for Dionavana demonstrated that they cannot be blamed for his death. There's a general conviction that somebody who comes to bewail a dead person cannot be involved in black magic that caused the death of this person. Thus, in this case, the crying of the people did not only express their sadness, but had also self-protective functions in a society that then still very much believed in sorcery. It has changed a bit by now. Every case of death implies a loss for the persons left behind. The smaller the group which is affected, the more serious is this loss, because it disturbs and even endangers the relationship between members of the group within its social network. Such a situation easily causes conflicts. The loss of a person implies frustration, which results not only in grief but also in rage, fury, anger, and aggression. And these feelings need to be channeled to prevent even more harm. This is probably one of the reasons why cultures developed mourning rituals. Human mythologists and ethnographers have shown that mourning is a universal feature of human behavior. Mourning evokes comfort and support and inhibits aggression. Public mourning, with its various forms of verbal and non-verbal behavior and its different levels of complexity, does not only express grief, but also channels emotions, especially aggression, and thus contributes decisively to social bonding within the group affected by the loss of one of its members. The mourners are not left alone. The group steps in, as Malinowski already pointed out. Mourning becomes a shared experience, and the danger of destroying the group's social networks is warded off. Therefore, mourning not only becomes a social event, but also a social duty, an obligation, which helps the mourners and the bereaved to finally overcome their loss and their sorrow. Thus, the ability to consciously switch on the expressive behavior of heavy crying, it's really, you see all the possible fluids that you have available in your face, flowing like hell, and switch it off again, and as they flow, they suddenly stop again. This reveals that the Trobrianders, probably because of the important cultural function of mourning behavior, obviously control this most extrovert form of expressing universal emotion of sadness. This crying for a deceased person is highly ritualized and indeed an important form of ritual communication on the Trobrians. Now, the next observation. What about morals prevailing for unmarried adolescents on the Trobrians? Back in 1929, Malinowski published his volume, to which he and his wife refer to as Our Sex Book, The Sexual Life of Savages in Northwestern Melanesia. It has a very great title, but I must assure you, it's a very, very dry sociological account of Tropian life. Although many parts of this book really present a dry sociological account of strict rules that regulate societal life on the Tropians, those paragraphs that emphasize the sexual freedom and the general promiscuity of young unmarried Tropians immediately got a strong public reception. It is true, up till now it's true, that compared with European standards of education and morals, Tropian adolescents enjoy an incredible amount of sexual freedom and until they decide to marry. After marriage, the official ideal for the Tropians, as well as for us, the Dinging, the white people, is for the spouses to live in monogamy and to be true blue to each other. The adolescents' seemingly unlimited sexual freedom, however, is governed by the strict maxim, and it's really a strict maxim. An unmarried person must not be jealous. Full stop. Or exclamation mark. The Tropian islanders are convinced that the keeping of this social commandment is controlled by the immortal spirits of the dead, the so-called Baloma. After the death of a person, his or her Baloma lives in a land of the dead, which is an underworld kind of paradise located on or rather under Tuma Island. The spirits of the dead are believed to visit their villages at times, especially during the period of the Harvest Festival. And this Milamala festival starts with the singing of the Vosi Milamala, the songs of the Harvest Festival. These are highly ritualized songs. They are sung in an archaic variety of Kilibila called Bigabaluma, the language of the spirits of the dead. They can be compared to the fact if I would now start suddenly to sing a Middle English song. I think almost no one of you who hasn't studied English as in literature would understand what I mean. And even those who had, like me, studied Middle English at university won't actually know what they are singing. They are a highly ritualized salute to the Baloma, and they are sung throughout the Milamala period, which lasts for a month or so, not only to please the spirits of the dead, but also always reminding the villagers of their presence. The Milamala period is characterized by conviviality, flirtation, and amorous adventures of the unmarried adolescents. All Harvard customs still favor erotic pursuits, as Malinowski already in 1929 pointed out. It goes without saying that during this festive period, social norms, rules, and regulations are interpreted more liberally and generously than at other times. This might lead to jealousies and rivalries that in escalation could threaten the community. However, the presence of the Baloma prevents exactly any such developments. The Tropians are convinced that the Baloma control whether the villagers living now still know how to garden, how to celebrate a good harvest, and how to behave properly, even while celebrating exuberantly. The Baloma keep strict watch over the maintenance of custom, and they punish with their displeasure any infraction of the traditional customary rules. And the most severe punishment is to hinder a person's production of yams in the coming year. Now, the Tropians know that the guardians of the norms of the past are present during the Milamala, checking whether that past is still present in the former villages. Although the pleasure of dancing and the sexual license during the Milamala also pleases the spirits of the dead, the Baloma must not be offended by unseemly and indecent behavior, which includes publicity and lack of decorum in sexual matters, as well as jealousy among bachelors. Keeping this in mind, Tropians must control their behavior, especially their emotions, because no one would dare offend the spirits. And this is exactly why Yolina did express his emotions of jealousy, observing the interaction between Induya and the handsome visitor from Kaduaga. As Veillet so practically remarked, he was indeed afraid of the Baloma. If he would have attacked his rival, they would have punished him. A young man on the Tropians can severely impress the girls by being an excellent gardener. This is an important route to status and fame. Yams is the actual fabric of the Tropian Islanders' social construction of reality. It plays the most prominent role in food exchange rituals, for example, in mourning rituals or in communal meals initiated by chiefs or other men of rank, as gifts for the fellow villagers as a payment for their support, for example, in the construction of a new big hula canoe. Yams exchanges have important bonding functions, not only for kinspeople, but also for fellow villagers who are members of other clans. Thus, yams is the tropian valuta par excellence. If a young man's production of yams is hindered by the Baloma as a punishment for indecent behavior like jealousy and possible forms of aggression resulting from him being unable to control his emotions, his chances are severely depreciated to impress girls in such a way that they are not only interested in him as a possible temporary lover, but also as a prospective spouse. Yolina managed to control his emotions and thus kept faith with respect to the spirits of the dead. He may have consoled himself, however, assuming that the young men from Kaduaga had stronger love magic than he. Betel nuts that young men offer to girls are believed to contain love magic, and the stronger the magic, the smaller the girl's chances to resist its owners. So probably this Kaduaga guy simply had a stronger magic, and his beloved Imdeduya couldn't do anything but follow. Okay, we all have our ways of excusations. To sum up, this anecdote reports a case of emotion control due to belief in controlling metaphysical powers. A belief which during the period of the harvest festival is reinforced day after day by the singing of the Vosi Milamala in the Biga Baloma. Now, what about adults and their morals? In public life, the interaction between husband and wife on the Tropians is rather controlled. There is no exchange of signs of tenderness, like, for example, holding hands, kissing in public, embracing each other, not even after some time of having been parted from one another. The relationship between a wife and her husband seems to be rather detached, at least in our eyes. Already Malinowski pointed out that there is an interesting and indeed startling contrast between the free and easy manner which normally obtains between husband and wife and their rigid propriety in matters of sex, their restraint of any gesture which might suggest the tender relation between them. When they walk, they never take hands or put their arms around each other in the way called kaipapa, which is permitted to lovers and to friends of the same sex. Ordinarily, a married couple walk one behind the other in single file. On public and festival occasions, they usually separate. The wife joining a group of other women, the husband going with the men. You will never surprise an exchange of tender looks, loving smiles, or amorous banter between a husband and a wife in the Tropians. To quote a terse statement of the case made by one of my informants, a man who puts his arm around his wife on the Baku is the central place of the village, that means in public, a man who lies down beside his wife on his yam house platform, he is a fool. If we take hold of our wife by the hand, we act as fools. That's Malinowski. And that's why we had these problems I was talking about the other day. The only emotional gesture of tenderness and mutual commitment allowed in public is lousing each other and eating the catch. And remember, this here is the cover of Malinowski's first edition of The Sexual Life of Savages. So it's almost pornographic for a Tropian islander. She is lousing them. His wife is lousing the paramount chief. While this exception is granted, and while married people have no problems with erotic scratches, the so-called kimali, on their backs, which are so, as Malinowski pointed out, so characteristic of native lovemaking, was neither explained by Malinowski nor by my consultants. This strict rule of behavior, this norm of emotion control, is in extreme contrast with the many sexual allusions in songs, ditties that accompany games played both by children and adults, and even in lullabies, and with the rather blunt, bawdy and obscene jokes that permeate everyday interaction on the Tropians. The explanation of this fact was given to me when we watched Yao's and Takeda's marriage. I think I told you, when a couple decides to marry, the girl doesn't leave the house of her boyfriend before dawn. There's quite a lot of traffic at that time in the village, and in the beginning I made the stupid mistake when I had to go out. Also, I greeted these girls, and of course they didn't greet back. Anyhow, they are all on their way back home to mom and dad, and then they lay down as if nothing had happened, and if they miss this time, if they oversleep, for example, and they do not want to marry this boy, then they do not show up. They just hide within the house and wait till night falls again. However, if the girl decides to marry that boy, and the boy agrees with her decision, it's usually this way, then they sit together in the morning at the boy's veranda, at the veranda of the boy's house. And indeed, that happened with Yao and Itakeda. They were very handsome people. The parents of both really were very happy with the choice of their children, and they started to make a big distribution festival. They even slaughtered a pig. We were observing what was going on. Barbara was sitting on my right side, and I was sitting on Bomsam Essa's. Bomsam Essa was sitting on my left side. Bomsam Essa was the best girlfriend of Itakeda. And on Barbara's side was the brother of Bomsam Essa. And what I didn't realize was that their mother was standing behind us, Ibowo. And just to make small talk, I came up with that really, for me, at that situation, quite innocent question. And Bomsam Essa, what about you? When are you going to marry? And hell, broke loose. Ibova came down on me like a fury, and actually she made me leave the premises. Otherwise, I feared she would have beaten me. I went back to my house, absolutely flabbergasted, and I was thinking, what had I done? And then I suddenly realized, oh, stupid. Oh, you stupid one. I just realized that I had violated the most important taboo, the brother-sister taboo. And this taboo runs, siblings must not know anything about each other's erotic engagements or love affairs, at least not officially. I had read Malinowski before I went to the Tropins. I knew about the taboo, but in the actual situation, I really behaved, again, like a bull in a china shop. I tried to regain the friendship of Ibowa, and it cost me a lot of tobacco as a peace offering, until I one day observed the following, and now listen carefully. Ibowa was sitting with her grandchildren playing cat's cradle, that is, these string figures. The games are popular, very much popular on the Tropins, but you find them all over in the world. She played the figure Tobabana, and she was reciting the following verses. Tobabane, Kwakea lunta, Kwalimati, Kusivilada, Kuyumba. I was shocked. Because this ditty translates as follows. Tobabana, you are fucking your sister. You are fucking her to death. You are turning around, you are weary and tired. Obviously, this game refers to a case of incest between brother and sister, the extreme case with respect to the violation of the brother-sister taboo. I asked Ibowa why she was reciting these verses to these young, innocent children who obviously had a great time to listen to their granny. On the one hand, whereas on the other, she was so furious with me because of the, for me, innocent question I asked her daughter in the presence of her brother. She laughed at me for the first time after my faux pas and said that this was something completely different. She was only playing with her grandchildren, and this play was just sopa. That was probably one of the most important moments in my field research career on the Trobriand Islands, because I learned the most important concept of the Trobriand Islanders, sopa. The Trobriand Islanders differentiate 8 situational intentional varieties which are constituted by metalinguistically labeled genres or text categories. And one of these varieties is called Bigasopa, and it can be glossed as the joking or the lying language, the indirect speech, the speech which isn't vouched for. This variety is characteristic for Trobriand forms of talk. It constitutes the default register of the Trobriand discourse. It's based on the fact that Kilivila, like any other natural language, is marked by features that include vagueness and ambiguity. Both features are used by its speakers as stylistic means to avoid possible distress, confrontation, or too much, and for a Trobriander, too aggressive directness of certain speech situations. If hear a signal they may be insulted by a certain speech act, speakers can always recede from what they have said by labeling it as sopa, as something they didn't really mean to say. SOPA signals the speaker's unmarked non-committal truth. Entropian etiquette then prescribes that hearers must not be offended at all by those utterances that were explicitly labeled as SOPA. If they feel offended and display this feeling publicly, then it's them who have lost face. The bigger SOPA is employed in everyday conversation, in small talk, in flirtation, in public debates, in admonitory speeches, in songs and stories, as a means of rhetoric to avoid possible conflicts and to relax the atmosphere of the speech situation. The variety also contributes to put forward arguments because it allows speakers to disguise their thoughts verbally and to disagree in a playful way without the danger of too much personal exposure. Moreover, the bigger SOPA variety is used for mocking people. As a means of irony and parody, it can be used to criticize certain forms of sociologically defined behavior, relatively mildly asking for immediate correction. Finally, the bigger SOPA variety offers the only license for the verbal breaking of taboos, and thus for the licensed use of the so-called bigger gaga variety, that's the bad language, including the use of most insults and swear words, not only for adults but also for children. And this is the reason why Ibova had no problems in reciting the verses that accompany the Tobabana string figure to her little grandchildren. It was just SOPA. Why did you make a fuss about that content? It's SOPA. Forget it. The bigger gaga variety refers to the inadequate use of language in a given communicative context. The basically aesthetic label is also used to qualify speakers' utterances with respect to a given standard norm of speech behavior. The use of this variety generally implies the distancing of speakers from their addressees. It is aggressive and insulting. Its use is at least officially not approved by the speech community, and quite often sanctions are imposed against someone who produces such bad speech. I want to point out here that the various genres that constitute the bigger SOPA serve the function of so-called safety valve customs, and this ethological concept needs some explanation. Every society puts some of its realms, domains, and spheres under certain specific taboos. However, the stricter the society is in regard to its observance of these taboos, the more of these taboos are ignored. But a society can secure its members' observance of certain taboos, especially of taboos that are important for its social construction of reality, by allowing the discussion of its taboos, especially of the sociologically less important ones, as topics of discourse. It may even allow its members to imagine the ignorance of taboos in a fictitious way, of course. And this is exactly how and why safety valve customs develop. Genres of bigger SOPA that clearly show features of bigger gaga are first of all classified as SOPA, as play, as something fictitious in Tropian society. The bigger SOPA thus generates a forum where the breaking of taboos and thus the use of bad language is allowed if it is done verbally. This forum permits a specially marked way of communication about something one doesn't talk about otherwise. Thus, on the Tropians, it's one thing to violate norms or even taboos in reality, but another thing to violate them in a fictitious way. In sum, the bigger SOPA variety channels emotions, it keeps aggression under control, and it keeps possibilities of contact open. This concept, with its tension releasing functions, secures harmony in the Tropian society and contributes to maintaining the Tropian Islanders' social construction of reality. It provides an important frame and at the same time is an effective and dynamic tool for ritual communication, which is so extremely characteristic and, as we have seen, very important for the Tropian Islanders' social interaction. Now, let's discuss the last point that I mentioned, the last observation, and this is actually the title of the paper that I published on this: Control your emotions. If teasing provokes you, you've lost your face. The concept of bigger SOPA is also important for understanding this fourth anecdotal observation of a quarrel which almost escalated into a fight, which I presented in the very beginning of my talk. As already pointed out, the bigger SOPA is the default variety for verbal interactions on the Tropian Islands. Speakers can always receive from what they have said by labeling it as SOPA, as something they didn't really mean to say, if they interact and signal that they may be insulted by a certain speech act. And Tropian etiquette, as I pointed out before, prescribes that hearers must not be offended at all by those utterances that were explicitly labeled as sopa. The opposite of the biga sopa variety is rather rarely used. It's biga peola or biga mokita, the heavy speech, the hard words, the true, the direct speech. If speakers use this type of register, the directness of the speakers indicate that they are completely aware of the fact that they have to take all risks of stripping away ambiguity and vagueness with which speakers normally can disguise their own thoughts, a feature so characteristic for the biga sopa variety, and that they can stand to argue publicly in terms of the heavy, that means peola, dimension of truth, and that means mokita. Thus, the use of this variety implies an important personal and social impact of what is said. Moreover, its use is and even requires to be explicitly marked by speakers declaring that what they are going to say now or what they have said is not sopa but biga peola or biga mokita. And the speaker's commitment in the marked sense finds its expression in ritualized formulae like, for example, Pesatuta balivala biga mokita, and now I will talk true language, now I will call a spade a spade. What happened in the interaction between Tudava and Dr. Nikani, described in the introduction above, was the following. Dr. Nikani, actually one of my best consultants, a well-known jester who likes to provoke people, started a kind of mock fight with Tudava. A few weeks ago, Tudava had announced that he wanted to organize Kayasa, a harvest competition next year. Such an announcement presupposes that the organizer of the harvest competition has access to many resources, including all kinds of food, especially yams, the highly valued long kuvi yams, pigs, betel nuts, and other goods and valuables, which he offers to the best gardeners in that competition as prizes. In the mock fight, Dr. Nikani had not only questioned Tudava's skills and his competence as a Tokwe Bagula, a master gardener, but also his ability to access to the resources which are necessary for organizing a kayasa. Both these topics are extremely critical and delicate because the title Master Gardener is very prestigious, and organizing a kayasa implies that the organizer is a man of high status and political impact within the village community. During this public mock fight, which got louder and louder and thus attracted more and more people, Dr. Nikani managed to provoke Tudava in such a way that he could no longer control his emotions. Thus, this incident reports a case in which forms and tools of ritual communication could not achieve their crucial functions of bonding and aggression blocking. Although Dr. Nikani had never claimed to be serious, which would have required that he announce his use of the biga mokita instead of the biga sopa, Tudava could not stand Dr. Nikani's teasing anymore. Unable to control his emotions any longer, he rushed in a frenzy for his weapons to fight his opponent, who obviously had severely insulted him. Tudava was really lucky that his neighbor managed to prevent him from fighting and to calm him down a bit. And actually we had to dress the wounds, and these bush knives are sharp as razor blades. The guy who prevented the killing really had severe wounds in his arms. Having regained his contenance, he realized immediately that he had lost his face in this incident. This insight resulted in Tudava's avoidance behavior towards the villagers of Tawema, especially towards Dr. Nikani and his brothers, in the weeks to come. Almost 6 weeks after his uncontrolled emotional and aggressive behavior, Tudava dared to appear in public again, but only by displaying his wealth in betel nuts and his generosity towards the village community as a whole, and especially towards his offender and his brothers. The fact that both the villagers and Dr. Nikani and his brothers accepted Tudava's general gift of betel nuts revealed that they had forgiven him his timely inability to control his emotions, an inability which could have easily led to deadly fights between two groups of villagers within Tawema, and thus to a severe distraction of the village community's social harmony and its construction of social reality. And I would be so bold and say, if there would have been a killing, that would have been the end of Tawema, and probably also the end of my field research. Now, Kuvakulati Amnumkola, that's a maxim crucial for the Tropan Islanders in the construction of their social reality, and this maxim, of course, translates control your emotion. In this presentation, I have shown that forms of ritual communication are pervasive throughout the group and Islanders' verbal and non-verbal behavior. I've pointed out that some of the most important functions of ritual communication are the creation and stabilization of social relations, the blocking of aggression and bonding, not the blocking of bonding, but the function of bonding, the safeguarding and securing of the social construction of the reality of the community, the controlling of emotions and their public display, and the distancing of emotions, impulses and intentions in order to relieve tensions, to regulate social dissensions, and thus to dispel elements that may turn out to be dangerous for the community. And I've emphasized the special role of the concept of Bida Sopa and its important role for emotion control in encounters that may easily escalate from argument and conflict to aggression and violence. I hope that I could also illustrate that despite the sophisticated forms of ritual communication and its tools, all these unwritten rules and tools for regulating and maintaining the Trojan Islanders' construction of their social reality are in the end dependent on the discipline of the members of this society and their willingness to realize and accept the necessity to follow maxims like kuvakulatian kula, control your emotions. And I dare to claim that this is not only the case for the Trojan Islanders. Thank you very much.
That was a great talk.
Thanks.
Do you have any question in the audience?
Yeah.
Gunter, you mentioned vagueness and ambiguity in their language or in their speech or in their interaction. Can you say more about what you mean by vagueness and ambiguity in their interaction?
Well, you can,
So,
for example, refer to an incident that happened to Gunter yesterday while he wanted to walk to the Bouguet, the beautiful freshwater well, and he fell down exactly at the same place where another big chief fell down and he had cut his forehead. And he said, oh, remember there was this strange guy who fell down exactly at the same place as our big boss. They never learn. Now, that is vagueness. Of course, everybody knows it's Gunter. He wants to ridicule, but he doesn't mention my name, and he just speaks in a very, very circumferential way. That would be vagueness. Ambiguity would be, for example, well, if Gunter goes to Lossia next week, who will be the one who he will take with him? And this may be a reference to a quarrel where the chief of all the islands of Kalyuna threatened me to burn down my house. Nice threat. If you come back to the field and suddenly you get a letter, Gunter, if you do not leave Tauema within 3 days, I burn down your house. And that was a threat which I then learned in a very tough discussion because this guy, the chief, was told by the Trojan Islanders, now that my wife is with me, he would have no chance to come with me to Losoya and my dinghy because the boat was full. And then that of course was ambiguity. They hinted towards this incident, and they also wanted to play a game of fun with me. They wanted to come into some sopa discourse. Where I then said, well, probably the guy who wanted to burn my house, but it's still standing. Something like this. Yeah, these are, and you have the ambiguity and vagueness in all natural languages. That is why people who are doing artificial intelligence do not come up with proper algorithms in order to come up with machine translations. Just compare Google machine translations with the real thing. That is, the fact is our language and the lexical items in our language have so many meanings in different situations that a machine is not able to pass them, at least not yet, but I have doubts that machine translation ever will come to results that are really good. This is one of the basic and defining features of natural languages. They are ambiguous and they are vague.
Vagueness and ambiguity in all languages.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
So, I mean, with regards to the language on the islands, would you say vagueness and ambiguity are very culturally determined?
No, they play on it. What is culturally determined is that they have realized that, and that, oh, wow, that's nice. They have never read Wittgenstein, but they know what a Sprachspiel is. And they play with it, and they are masters in using all kinds of allusions, ideas, hints, and you have to know what it is. And if you understand it, and it takes some time to understand it, you see how great their rhetoric abilities are in these islands. They are all excellent speakers, and they show you what you can do with language if you really know how to use it. They are the born pragmatists. Oh, yeah. Hey guys, nice to see you. After a long time.
Just a colleague asked me questions about the factive English. I know that no, but also in Korean you can also have the non-factive no. A bit strange, right? But I was wondering if you have the factive no and the non-factive no in Korean, for example. So, for example, I say, I know that this happened. It did happen, right? But if you like focus, you say, I know this happened. You don't know, but you're pretending to know. So I think about that big solver, because if the person is playing around with language, I didn't really mean that. In a sense, does that negate the whole truth of the thing they just said, or do they have a specific word for it?
No, it's just super. It's just super. That's it.
Just super.
Yeah, it's just the whole concept. The whole concept is more or less self-explanatory. If you don't mark what you say as biga mokita or biga peula, then you can always recede from what you have said. And people are not really interested whether it's true or not true. They may inquire if they want to later in different words, but not necessarily with that speaker. And then they make these discussions. But that is actually the nice aspect with SOPA. They can never pin you down. They can only pin you down if you say Besakuta Baliwala Bika Mokita. But then this can be deadly if you do that. Because if you insult someone by speaking Bika Mokita, then this person easily could go to a wagao, a man, or it's mostly men, but also some women who know black magic, and can ask them to use your black magic, that he or she uses her or his black magic in order to kill that guy. And they believe in that. We have experienced that there is something like what anthropological medical people call psychogenic death. We have one case, and I experienced that, where a young man, a relatively young man, he was in his early 30s, came from, he was an excellent carver by the way, he came from the garden, absolutely bewildered, and said, I will die. And he went into his house, laid down, and 3 days later he was dead. And he was convinced that someone had bewitched him, and that it was impossible for him to ask another a black magician to heal him. And he died. He was convinced that he had to die, and so he died. And maybe he was one with a very loose mouth. And maybe he had said something that insulted someone else, and maybe he even was so stupid to say, this is bigamokita. These things can happen, and they happen. So, better don't say, Besakuta Baliwala bigamokita. I never used that phrase. Only in writing. Anything else? Yeah? when you...
Thank you very much for your talk. I really enjoyed it very much. I have two questions. The first question is that you pointed out that in a tri-brand island, the relationship between a couple is kind of, they seldom display their emotions in public. So I would like to know how a couple interact in their private life. And the second question is that what kind of factors will lead to divorce in this society? Is divorce very common in this kind of society because they seldom display their emotions in terms of the bodily experiences?
Okay, to your first question, I have no idea. Because I stick to my field researcher's ethics, and there are two things I never researched, and I never thought I should put my nose in it. One is intimate talk between lovers or in the family, and the other one is wooing behavior of boys and girls. I think a field researcher has to have his or her borders that you do not transcend. And this behavior was very much respected by people not only on Kailiuna Island, but I was known because of that all over the islands. And I think that was a very good. Was in a very good position to get all kinds of information because people respected me. I was not one of these tourists who just came for one thing to the Tropians. The other thing is, of course, divorce is happening, and it's very easy because it's a matrilineal society. If maybe it may be that the man has too many extramarital experiences and affairs and talks about it. He, for example, after birth giving, the Tropian Islanders used to have a postpartum taboo until the child that was born could walk. And during that time, in the postpartum taboo, the parents it was tabooed for them to have sexual intercourse. Most often, men in these first 1.5 years went abroad and worked in Alotan or somewhere else, where they were not controlled socially, and they came back and were very tactfully avoiding any kind of hints that they may have had a girlfriend. However, if this is made public and if men boast about the affairs they have with other women in the village, if they have them, then the woman can say, well, do your thing, I do mine. She takes all her belongings, takes her children, because they belong to her and not to him. They are matrilineal. The father is not related whatsoever with his children, and she just goes back to her village. She leaves the village of her husband. And once she has left the village of her husband, the first thing she does is, when you marry, your grass skirts go up to the end of the knees. And when you have divorced someone, you wear your grass skirts like a young girl to the grass skirt and see it. That's a good indication whether a woman is available or not for other men who may have just lost their wife. Other reasons are that, well, like in our societies, that people realize that they have married the wrong partner, and they even then depart as more or less friends, but they depart, and the departure is not so traumatic because they say, well, we made a mistake, we can't manage to live together. We have two different interests in our life, or the wife doesn't support her partner, or her man, or the man doesn't support her wife. It's very interesting to see how sophisticated the bond between men and woman in husband and wife in the Tropians is marked publicly. A woman who was not born into the two highest clans of the Tropian Islanders can get as much status as the Malassi women, these are the highest clan women, if she is very much involved in the distribution of grass skirts. These are, of course, not grass skirts, they are made out of banana fibers, but grass skirts is one of these abbreviations that are incorrect. So the fiber skirts are distributed, and the more you are involved as a woman in this distribution of fiber skirts, the higher is your status. However, as a woman, you are dependent on your husband, because the husband has to plant the banana trees. So if a woman has a lot of resources with respect to banana leaves, it shows that her husband loves her because she's building all these banana trees for her. It's bonding. On the other hand, if a woman always stays in the village and gossips with other women or with other men or whatever, and doesn't help her husband in the garden, this will also sooner or later be the end of the marriage, because women have an absolutely important role in caring for the family. Like with our in our societies, they are not so much different, but they also, for example, have very strict responsibilities. Like they are responsible for the wood to make a fire. They are responsible to be at the right time back home with the right plants that they can cook, and she is the one who prepares the meal. You only will see a Tropic Islander cooking if he is with other men on a fishing expedition. Otherwise, this is women's work. They have strict regulations, and they wouldn't understand all our ideas about what it means to be a modern man and a modern wife. They may even ridicule us. But that is their culture, their topic. Is it fine? Okay, good. Yeah?
Yeah, I enjoyed the talk very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
But I think I may have missed something here. For example, when the grandma was saying that it was a sofa,
Yeah.
so she has to make it clear to you. So obviously, most of the time, people when they are talking, they don't have to mark it. You know, it's a default way of speaking.
Yeah, exactly.
Am I right?
Yeah, exactly. But I was a greenhorn. I was just there, just in my first field trip, and I didn't know why they were why she was so. Well, I knew then afterwards that I made that mistake, but I didn't understand how she could recite such a pornographic verse that broke the most important taboo to that little ones. I had no idea. That was one of the reasons why I said this was probably one of the most crucial points in my whole field research, that I got that. And you only get some of these points just by behaving like a bull in a china shop. You make big mistakes, but these mistakes lead to insights that are crucial for the whole understanding and also for my language acquisition. That was this incident happened about, I was there for 5 months and 6, 7, 8 months. 8 months after I stayed there. And before I had no idea, I never heard the word sopa. Because as you say, they do not necessarily use it as their everyday comment on what was said.
So sofa does not have to be marked. But
No,
on
no.
the contrary, when you want to speak something true,
Yeah,
it has to be
that
marked.
has to be marked. Yeah,
Okay, so
that means everything else is
from our
default.
standards, so these people are insincere by default.
Yeah.
They're not allowed to say
No,
that.
it's not a question of sincerity. Not at all. No, it's not a question of sincerity. That would miss the point. It's just their way of understanding speech. It may be insincere sometimes. Like, for example, my wife always wanted to go on a sailing boat, have a trip on a sailing boat. And she heard for a year, and then for 4.5 months, when we came back in 1989, nubia, igao, oder igao nubia, that was tomorrow or later tomorrow. But of course, it never happened. It was like the mañana with the Mexicans. It will happen tomorrow or never. So it's if you like, it's even a kind of a form of politeness. They do not want to deny something to you, and so they said, yeah, we'll do it. But they know it's super.
my study, at least, I think haunting is taken as a way of express harmonious relationship.
Yeah.
So this sounds very similar to what I have found, and also the Japanese scholar back in 1930 has found this characteristics in Taiwan. So this looks like very similar to what
Well,
I found.
no wonder Taiwan is the birthland of Austronesian languages and people.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
I was wondering if sopa is unmarked, right? Why, when you committed your atrocious taboo, why couldn't you just say, oh well, sorry, it was just joking?
Well, because they said no way out. No way out. This is too much of a taboo, and you have uttered that, and you should know. And this is something that really children learn very early, even in the children's groups. They learn it from their older peers. Never to talk about friendships of their siblings, even if they are children's friendships. Oh, look, Isakapo loves Tokoyumila. You don't say that. You won't hear that. Like that is something like kindergarten children in Europe quite often tease each other. Oh, you love Ruth, and Ruth loves Peter. No, that's not happening there. It's forbidden immediately. And the bigger, the older children immediately interfere. And this is also learned in the children's groups, not necessarily from the parents. The children's groups are very strong agent of socialization.
Now that you mentioned a language acquisition, so when did they start, or do they start using this sopa?
The children.
The children.
Yeah, well, they learn it as early as possible. They learn it in the normal language acquisition. It took me a long time to realize what it was as a second language learner. But for the Tropian Islanders, it's something they just learn while they acquire the language. And they definitely do not hear this biga sopa is something that is a form of ritual communication. They know what kind of functions they have and what it is, and how they should behave if they want to speak and behave verbally correctly. It's pragmatic rules, and these pragmatic rules are absolutely important, not only in these smaller societies, but as we all know, also in our societies. Sorry.
I would like to talk a bit about the Formosan languages.
Yeah.
Because we have the same situation. You have a big language family, which is Kivila, and you did a research on one of these islands. Here we have our small island, and we have at least 15 or 16 languages, maybe more, which are, some are not recognized, some are recognized, but in each society, and I think Rick is here, so he will know what I'm saying, that each society has its own taboos, its own this kind of interactional ways of doing, and they might be different. If you go to the Atayao, that's completely different than if you go, for example, to the Rukai or to the Taiwan. So if you're doing Rukai and then you go to Taiwan, you say, okay, I know what's going on. I think it's about the same, just a little bit different. But if you go to the north, back to the, so do you have, because you said you have 12 families, but you only concentrated on that specific language and that specific island?
Yeah. However, of course, the Tropian Islanders are in contact with other people. And sometimes, or in older times, they also had contact with people where they did not really know how to properly behave, and that was fatal. Because they are involved in a ritualized exchange of shells and arm that are either worn as necklaces or as arm shells. And the best and the most prominent partners were the Dobuan Islanders. They speak a completely different language, they have a completely different society, and one of the crucial differences up till the 1940s was that they were cannibals, fierce cannibals. And sometimes the people from Kadoaga sent out, I know that by personal story from one of the old men who could remember that his grandfather was killed by the Doguns. They sent these parties over to Dobu, and then they missed something. Probably they forgot that the first thing to do is to eat with your hosts. Once you have eaten with a cannibal, you are safe. So if you are in doubt, eat something with the person. Then they two shiploads, that was 24 people, 24 men, were killed on that Kula mission, and they were eaten up. So something went wrong with the way of communication. And probably they didn't behave properly with respect to the pragmatic rules that were necessary to interact with these cannibals, despite the fact that they had before a lot of contacts with them. And that they came, 2 years later, they came back with all the shells that they had stolen from the people that they had eaten, and probably asked the last load of people was delicious, please send some more. Who knows? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful talk. My question still starts from anthropology one. As we know, in a matrilineal society, a symbolic real reproductive unit is sibling, right, between brother and sister. That's what we read from Marilyn Stressen's gender overview. She analyzed the shortbread case. So here I start to wonder, after the soap episode, the question is, okay, I'll give you another example. David Schneider, he did his field work in Micronesia, and his key informant was killed because his key informant, a young adult Yapese man, he just joked about others, about his neighbor has relation with his sister, so that's why he was killed. Very, very similar, intense taboo. So my question here, because you contrast like your presence and a grandmother's, but now I start to wonder that in the category of Sopa, there are only very limited relatives. They can refer to something serious, taboo, like, for example, like the grandmother and very young grandchildren. She can jokingly talk about the brother-sister incest, but for some, more distant people, it is nothing we can touch. Right. So I'm just thinking of I'm just thinking of to what extent the SOPA category can be extended.
Yeah, well, I think it's a very, you have to do with culture-specific things or with subjectivities within cultures. And this is one of these absolutely culture-specific things on the Droplins. It may be absolutely different even in Micronesian societies that you can do these things. One of the things that I would assume that you find in most societies in the world is that you have very, very specific rules that govern your relationship and your way of speaking to close relatives. You have very, very specific forms of politeness. You have very specific forms of avoidance behavior. You have very specific forms of showing your respect. That is in a different way, not only with verbal politeness, but also with your bodily behavior. And these things simply differ. And it's one of the basic aims of, I think, anthropological linguistics to find out what kinds are general, what kind of things that we observe are general, and what kinds of things that we observe are culture specific, that we can only understand if we are on common ground with the culture that we are researching. Therefore, I think any anthropologist who claims that he has understood a society who doesn't speak the language has to face the fact that his readers are at least extremely skeptical about what he or she has written. You have to know the language, as Malinowski once said it, anthropology without linguistics is sterile, and linguistics without anthropology is blind. And I think that is true. And you really have to take it seriously that when you want to do anthropological linguistics, you have to be, you can say I'm an anthropological linguist, where I point out I'm a linguist by training, but by training in the field I also had to become a kind of anthropologist. I would never claim that I'm an anthropologist, but you can also say I'm a linguistic anthropologist, where you say I'm an anthropologist, but I have learned the fact that I also have to know some linguistics in order to find out what's going on in my culture.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah. Sorry, there's another one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, just after you.
Professor Gunter, I just want to ask, some scholars, they consider, politeness, I mean, the psychology behind politeness theory is universal, while some scholars, they think that there's a West and East divide. So the psychology behind politeness might, there might be, positive or negative phase. So sometimes in Chinese, we say that we have fake lian or mians, right?
Yeah.
From your study, from your field trip, how would you consider this point, this notion?
Yeah. Well, the claim that my dear colleagues and my boss, Steve Levinson and Penny Brown, made resulted in a whole lot of articles in journals. And most of these articles in journals prove that the universal aspect is not to behold. That there is so much cultural specificity in politeness that you can't say or can't follow that theory in 1978 or so, when they first published politeness, that this is universal. And I also, and actually I think they are no longer believing that it's universal. But I think it was an absolutely interesting approach to see whether in some semantic domains, and that was something that we also did in our research in the cognitive anthropology research group and in the language and cognition department, that you come up with a topic, with a semantic domain, and see how this topic is filled, and see what you can get out of it, what has been known so far, and take this as a kind of summary of hypothesis, and provide a bunch of hypotheses that can be tested. And that was exactly what happened. The hypotheses were tested, most of them were falsified. And because it showed that this semantic domain is obviously so important and in different cultures that each and every culture tried to express it and to codify it in different ways and means. And this is, I think that was one of the big gains of their publication, that all these other publications resulted in a lot more knowledge about linguistic pragmatics in the languages of the world. And this was something that I really admire with respect to the result of this book and this publication. And Steve knows, and Penny knows what I'm thinking about.
Do you think what kind of psychology behind this? In this language, or govern the notion of politeness? For example, in Chinese, we might say that lian and nians governs the determines if it's polite or not polite, right?
Yeah.
So do you have any kind of
No,
observation on this?
Not really. No. I think if you really want to properly research this problem, you cannot avoid psychology. And I really mean serious psychology where you do experiments. And these experiments then must be guided by a good knowledge of the culture, of course. So, well, I only know of one group of psychologists and anthropologists who also worked with us for a while, well, this got absolutely interesting results. That was cooperation between Jörg Wassmann and the guy from the Darsen, Pierre Darsen. Pierre Darsen and Jörg Wassmann. Pierre Darsen was the follower of Piaget as a psychologist in Geneva, and Jörg is a good old friend of mine who has long retired. And they were together in a culture in the highlands of Papua New Guinea. And they realized that, actually it's an old topic in anthropology, the people they researched do a differentiation between hot things and cold things. And if you have this hot and cold dichotomy, you really have to know the culture very, very well to understand why certain things are claimed to be hot and why others are claimed to be cold. And the only way to find out what is really meant by hot and cold was that Pierre, informed by the knowledge about the culture by Jörg, who was the anthropologist, came up with a number of tests and experiments. And these tests and experiments really came up or ended up in a kind of frame which was fuzzy, because there were also outliers, but nevertheless in that framework they could come up with some definitions of what it meant for the Haruai to be either hot or to be either cold. And I think this is something which is probably similar to the problem of what is the psychological basis of politeness. I think you have to have then these people who know how to isolate various variables and help you to do a methodology that you as an anthropologist or as a linguist are not familiar with. Yeah. But this is the only answer I can give to your question. Yeah.
Well, if you allow, I would like to come back to the point of soda.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Based on your, maybe this is not what I'm interested, but I'm just wondering if you could recall, based on your data or your experiences, those kind of sofa, what kind of linguistic form do they take? Do they manifest themselves? Are they satire, irony, taunting, or what could?
Sopa subsumes all of these. It's irony, it's joking, it's even barter sometimes, banter, you know, where we really spoke very, very bawdy language. And this is something the Tropian Islanders love, by the way. And you can, as I said, you can say almost everything, and it's Sopa, and people really enjoy these games.
Which kind, in your opinion, is the most common type, or most frequently?
I can't. Well, you are called names, for example. You have nicknames. You are addressed in a special way, or you are approached in a special way. People try to trick you in a nice way, not to steal something or things like that, but to trick you. Suddenly you want to go out with your boat. Everything is ready, and I don't know whether you know these outboard engines. Usually there is a kind of key that you have to put in so that the boat doesn't get out. The engine doesn't get out. And suddenly you look after that key. Where the hell is that key? Anyone seen the key? No. Where is that key? And then suddenly someone puts it in front of you when you don't see it and says, Gunter, it's all the time before your eyes. Marvelous, no? And I, of course, join in their laughter. You have to learn that if you get angry, you lose your face. These kind of little tricks or things happen, but They are irrelevant to the group learners. They may not be irrelevant to you in that moment, but they are. Okay?
Is that
Yeah.
the boat? Is that the only means to get out of the island or
Yeah.
to get to another
Yeah,
village?
yeah.
So
No,
in
no,
that-
not to the other village. I can walk to all the villages. However, if I want to walk to 2 villages, wait a minute, I'll just show you. That's on the map. I can walk from Tawema easily to Kuma, easily to Kaduaga, easily to Biba, and to Lebola. However, if I want to go to Kesiga and Bulakwa, I have to be there at a very specific time of the year with a very specific tidal, situation, because here is a river, and this river is a place where many, many, many nice crocodiles congregate. So you want to circumvent them, and you can only do that at low tide, and you even have to have at least a small canoe, because there are 2 reef channels that you have to either swim through or you sit on a canoe and people will take you over. That is one thing, and of course on this side is also a river, but not with crocodiles, but if you have high tide, you can't pass it. You can go around through the sea. You have to be extremely careful not to step on stingrays. This is the area of stingrays. The one is the crocodiles, the other one is the stingrays. So you have to be very careful, and you better know when you go to which island at what time. And but there is no other way to commute to all these other islands, but only by boat. And as I said, there is one airstrip here, because the Americans expected the Japanese to come to the Trobriand Islands in the Battle of the Coral Seas, but only 2 poor Japanese showed up, and they were immediately killed. Probably they got shipwrecked or whatever. But these were the only Japanese ever being as soldiers on the islands. There are lots of tourists now.
Gunter, I
Yeah.
have a question about the pragmatic rules. So to study pragmatic rules in relation to culture or to the society, we might come up with maxims,
Yeah.
right? And you mentioned one maxim to explain what people do and how people behave, both linguistically in the society.
But-
So when it comes to a maxim for the explanation of the speech behavior, there is usually more than one maxim, and how do you rate the priority of the maxims?
Well, you should not bring maxims into play that are based on Price. Paul Price and his maxims also overgeneralize, and Price's maxims do not play a role whatsoever in Kilivila. I've written a paper, the case the Trobriand Islanders against H. Paul Price, and I clearly show that everything what Price said about his maxims doesn't hold for the Trobriands. And be specific, be precise. If you have something as Bigasopa as the default, how should you follow Price's rules? Simply off the point. We have completely different local, Kilivila-specific rules and regulations and pragmatic rules. And they have nothing whatsoever to do with philosophers who never went to other speech communities like Paul Price, but were sitting in their American armchair thinking about what is responsible for natural languages. It's wrong, simply wrong. And how could he do that being someone who doesn't even speak another language? He just speaks English, for example.
Yeah. So I mean, you can have, or we can have certain pragmatic rules particularly for this culture. But within this culture, for a particular speech event or speech behavior, maybe more than, and I think it's possible to have more than one pragmatic rule
Yeah, of course. Of course,
Yeah.
there are many pragmatic rules. You have to learn them. And some of them are unwritten rules. You just have to know how to properly behave. Like our children learn how to behave properly in our societies. Many of these behavior rules are not affecting verbal behavior. But the non-verbal behavior that is given and biased on these behavioral rules has effects on the verbal behavior. You just do not approach someone who is walking behind there and knock on his head and say, "Hey, sorry, what time is it?" It's not the way you do it. You just say, well, first of all, you try to get in eye contact, then you say, "Excuse me, please, sir, could you tell me what time is it? Or could you please tell me what time is it?" These are things that are learned, and these are things that where you really balance verbal and non-verbal behavior, so that they follow the ideas of your society, what it means, in this case also to be polite.
I was thinking about analyzing data, spoken data, with regards to maxims. So usually you can find more than one thematic rule or maxim that can explain the same speech behavior.
Yeah. How will you try to analyze these spoken data if you do not have the situative context?
I mean, in this situation.
Okay.
Yeah,
Then you have the situative
not
context.
in isolation,
Then,
not an utterance in isolation.
then that is fine.
It's always
Yeah, but
in the context.
Yeah, but then you also have to have the cultural knowledge in order to analyze it properly. You may analyze it from your point of view. That's fine. But then you do an ethic analysis. That is an analysis of the data from the point of view as a researcher who is biased by his or her cultural and language background. If you try to do an emic analysis, you try to analyze the data informed on the knowledge you know about the speakers and the producers of these data. And then you try to come up with a description that mirrors their understanding of the situation. It may often not be the right analysis because you are not a native speaker and you are not really an inborn person in this society, but you at least try to be as close as possible to their ideas. And you do not take frames that are given by our Western theories and try to put them on top of something that is different.
We don't do that.
Yeah.
But I mean, even within the society, provided with enough knowledge about the culture or about the society, it could, I could imagine there could be ambiguity or uncertainty about the kinds of maxims involved with the speech.
But if I want to be conceited now, and I will do that in a joking way, in a Tropical Islanders way, just go back to the publications by Senft on the Tropical Islanders.
Yeah.
But I know it's conceited and it was just a joke. As a sopawa, okay?
Definitely.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes, I have more questions to ask. The first one is I would like to follow Professor Su's questions. She just asked about the SOPA language.
Yeah.
I think her question is that whether SOPA language is formally marked. For example, like evidential marking. So they just have to learn from the context, right?
No, you just understand whatever you say first and foremost as SOPA. And then you have what is clearly marked are all the other language varieties that you have. What is marked is the Bigamegwa, that's the language of magic, because it follows very special rules and a completely different lexicon. There are some expressions that even the magician doesn't know what it means. Then you have the Bigatumaya or the Bigabaluma, where you have this archaic version of Kilivila that was probably spoken 200 years ago. Then you have the Bigatapwaroro, which is a mixture of Tilivila and Muyu, because the missionaries who came in 1894 had used Muyu, which is a language that belongs to the Tilivila language family, but which is different than Tilivila, and most of these forms have found their way into songs, into church songs, for example, and also into some of the translations of the Bible. You have the Piga Sopa, which is the default. You have the Piga Peula, which has to be marked. And you have the Piga Buena and the Piga Gaga, which is aesthetically judged by the speech community. It's a good language. For example, if you can very well say Piga Sopa, then a Piga Gaga, Piga Sopa. You have a good way of speaking Sopa. But you also can say that was Piga Gaga, what you just said. So all the others are marked. Sopa is the default.
So I guess every language has an implicature, and is this language very rich in implicature?
As I said, Christ is the wrong person. And Christian theories do not play any role whatsoever. You may analyze things as implicatures, but then you force Tilivila into a theoretical frame which is irrelevant.
Okay.
Sorry. I can only say that. I'm not against Christ as a philosopher. He has many insights that, and I think you can use Christian maxims and Christian ideas perfectly well for Indo-European languages, but they are inadequate for other languages that do not follow the example of English. Like Chomsky linguistics is absolutely inadequate for any other language than, let's say, English. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. My last question is, you point out that in this society, people sing a song in which there are a lot of like erotic expressions.
Yeah.
And I would like to know whether this kind of society has people like poets who who compose the new ideas or like new lyrics in the songs, so that they can sing the new songs instead of the traditional songs.
Yeah, you have that, and this is usually not one person alone in former times. In former times, these songs and song cycles were set up on a communal basis. Some of these songs are also claimed that they dreamt about being in the village of the spirits of the dead, and that they heard these songs and that they remembered them and came back, and then they present that to an audience, and then the audience and the guy who said I heard that in Tuma really work on it. We have one poet who only writes poetry in English, but if you look at all these other songs, they are extremely poetic, especially the ritualized songs. And even magical formulae are poetic because they follow specific forms of rhythm and patterns. So these people are extremely aware with respect to what they can do with their language, and it's an ideal place for a linguist because they are so metalinguistically aware. They classify each and every genre with a label of their own. It's indigenous labels. They do not say this is a pop song or something like that. Wosi, and they also differentiate wosis. For example, they have a very specific differentiation. There was a time when a lot of young men just went to a neighboring island where there was a gold mine, and they worked there, and they didn't come back for half a year or for a year or so. And then they came up with composing songs about the poor guys who sit there far away from their sweetheart in the village and far away from their parents. And then they composed these songs, and they refer to these songs as Wosi to Paisiwa. The Wosi is song, and To is the marker for man, Paisiwa is worker, so it's the songs of the workers. And the workers were, by default, the people who went away from the Tropians just to earn their money on that other island in the gold mine. It was in Normandy. gold mine, Normandy Island, one of the Dante Pastor Islands. Yeah, okay.
This is maybe a dangerous question.
Yeah. Well, as long as you don't say it's fine.
I'm just afraid that this will require a long answer. But if you say that Sopa is basic genre, and you kind of assume that Saber and Worf are more or less right in whatever modern equivalent of their theory that you believe, then the concept that the Kilivida people would have of what is truth and what is important in reality would be completely different from us. Is that true, or is that
no. I would say this is a cultural what is the right word? A cultural epiphenomenon on how people try to understand their language. They know exactly what's right and wrong, and they know exactly what the truth is and what is not the truth. With the exception of some of the cultural things that are claimed to be truth, not like the legends, the lili or the myths. But everything else is something where they know exactly whether they are lying or not. And they also know whether they say the truth or not. They are only more afraid than we are to call a spade, because this can be dangerous in a society where you can be punished by a black magician and you get killed because you couldn't keep your mouth shut.
But this wouldn't be metaphoric, like this idea of Sopa wouldn't be, for example, metaphorically transferred to inanimate happenings. For example, nature plays a trick on us, this kind of concept.
Actually, that is their idea. I always was astonished, they don't have a passive voice. So if you stumble over a stone, you say, Dakuna Eva, the stone, he hit me. Or if you walk through the bush and you hurt your foot on a sharp stick of wood, then you say, Kai Basi, the wood, it pierced me. So it's always someone else. It's not you who does something to you. Do not say, I'm so stupid, I stumbled over that stone. No, the stone hit me. So the animist thing is there, definitely, but there I think also in a kind of joking way, because I'm sure that they know that they are the agents who stumbled over the stone. But it's a nice excuse.
Devolve responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that's Darcy.
Yeah. Perhaps being the only neo-Gratian in the room, and you've been working in linguistics for so many years, and you guys probably have some educated discussion about whether Grice is wrong or right. If so Liga Sopa is the default conversation, and Grice, he theorized that cooperation is the default for language. So couldn't you therefore argue then the two cultures have swapped it over, that Grice English prefers a cooperative discussion, whereas Liga Sopa is not uncooperative, but is certainly flouting the maxims in that sense that they don't need to. I mean, the others, he said, they know when they know truth, they know when they lie, but they simply flout them. Or could be said that is the way to do it. In English, we're doing the opposite. We are actually following the maxims of the hill.
Well, that's another thing of the Broken Islanders that is a very nice characteristic of them and a nice trait of them, and which makes the language in the near and in the far future not endangered at all. They are absolutely arrogant with respect to what they say and what their language is. And they do not care what English people think about their language. They say, we have done it always like this and we will do it, and if these stupid dim-dim do it the other way, let them do it. They are very tolerant, but they will laugh their heads off if I would come up with such a discussion. Yeah. Okay. Yeah?
So still have a question about one of the maxims. unmarried person must not be jealous. I'm
Yeah.
particularly curious. Is Maxim more emphasized during the Milamala period?
Yeah.
Or it is pervasive all throughout?
It's pervasive, but it's most important during Milamala because the Tropianos think that the spirits of the dead come to their villages and are there. And therefore, chances that a Baluma will see you beating up the boyfriend of your girl or the latest boyfriend of your girl is more dangerous than in other situations. That is, it's probably I shouldn't use the term maxim because that reminds too many people too quickly of Christ. It's a norm. Yeah. It's really a norm, and like the norm, do not and the taboo do not say anything about amorous adventures of yourself when your sister or your brother is nearby. Yeah.
I'd like to ask a few questions because I understand that you work in the Traibiuna island,
Yeah.
and you work on the Tauwema language.
Yeah. Pigakalama.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I wanted to know whether you said you can walk from one village to another village. Do the harvest festival include all the village together, or do that include only the village of Tauwema?
When the time for the harvest festival is announced by the showing up of a certain worm in the sea. So they are the first here in Bakuta to come up with the Milamala, then the worm comes up, then Bulakwa and Kesiga are the first on our island to have Milamala. And after about a week, Ebola and Giwa may have it, and after another week, it will be Kuma and Kaduwaga. And then we are there, also another week. So you have a lot of time there. It can also mean that on our island we have almost 2.5 months a Milamala festival somewhere in a village, and all the people go there.
All the people.
So
these are festivals where the
Yeah.
people go to
And
the
they-
other
yeah.
village to be
And
together.
in order to manage that not too many people are there at the one and the same time, they are invited. So they are regulated by the big man or by the chief. And they also expect when they invite others, then they will go there as well. It's always that big distribution and redistribution of food and of hospitality, which really binds this society to a very strong way.
You replied to another question I have.
Uh-huh.
I'm a linguist, but also I've worked with these
Yeah.
different kinds of ethnic groups for many years. So there's different. You say matrilineal
Yeah.
and very local.
Yeah.
And in some societies in Taiwan, only the men are allowed to speak and the women have to listen. But in other societies, you went to Taiwan, so for example, the Puyuma,
Yeah,
there used to be very much women are in charge of.
female chiefs, yeah.
I don't know. I never heard about chiefs, women, but they are in charge of the village, and they usually the men will listen, and they are the ones that can. And we have very good documentation because my colleague and friend did very good work on the Puyuma, so I know about them more.
Okay.
So what about, because you said that chiefs, so in some of our cultures, some tribes originally had chief, others did not. Originally some had some hierarchy, others did not. After the Japanese came, everything was changed, so now it's different
No.
from what used to be.
On the Tropians, with the exception of one case that is documented in the 50s about a female chief, all chiefs on the Tropian Islands are male. I have no idea why there was that exception with a female chief, and I'm not too sure whether I should really rely on the source, because when I asked the Tropian Islanders whether there was ever a female chief, they simply laughed at me. But the interesting thing with the distribution of matrilineal and very local has very interesting consequences. And the other thing, what has also very severe consequences, is that you have the rule of exogamy. You are not allowed to marry within the same clan. Now let's first come back to the relevance that this maxim, a rule, the norm, this norm has. If you are a chief, you will not be able to make your son a chief as well, because your son is not related with you. The chief has to make sure that he marries. He must be a Malasi. First of all, he must belong to the clan of a Malasi. Otherwise, no one. Yeah, a very clear, strict hierarchy. So he must be a Malasi, and he can't marry another Malasi. That means his children will belong to another clan, and that makes them not electable to become a chief. So they have nothing like an hereditary government or an hereditary power on the Trobriand Islands, which is a very interesting and I think very cleverly installed thing. The other cleverly installed thing is that you have the matrilineal line on the one hand and the patrilocal residence. The matrilineal line also owns land. Now, if a woman leaves her village and lives in the village of her husband, the child or the children that the woman will give birth to have no land rights in the village of the husband. However, they have land rights in the village of the woman. What do? They lease their land to other people who are exactly in the same situation, and with a lease, that is usually yams or sweet potatoes or taro or sometimes even a pig, with that they can lease land in the village of their father. That means it's a very close, intricate network between individuals who are dependent on each other, otherwise they can't plant their yams. Now, if there is any kind of quarrel that may develop into a fierce war, they simply cannot allow themselves to kill more than 2 or 3 people, because otherwise the whole network would be killed. What do they usually do in these cases? 1 or 2 persons are killed, and who are these people? Usually those who were responsible for the quarrel. They can compensate for that loss, because then the whole community steps in and gives the members of the clan of the other people that were killed some compensation, as it's so beautifully called all over in Papua New Guinea, and then the case is settled again. But they simply can't afford more casualties. And I think this is absolutely beautifully and intricately organized. It's a fantastic society.
So what you're saying is making me thinking about something else. Have there been war between the different Sinsim and, for example, Kitava or Mua?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of.
Not never any, but you said there are places where there are cannibals.
Yeah, but they are far away. Wait a minute, maybe I have that. Yeah, no, here. Here are the Trobriands. The guys that ate up the 2 shiploads from Katuaga live here. That's Tobu.
So they are Papuan?
That is, well, they're all Papuan.
They're Austronesian and Papuan?
Well, they actually are claimed to be in Papua, but they speak Austronesian languages.
So originally they were Papuan?
Yeah.
They have been
They were superseded by Austronesians coming in. And there was something else. The wars that really covered a relatively long area on the Trobriands were once fought between Sinaketa and Omarakana out of political reasons. But they ended very quickly. The Sinaketans came with troops of warriors and challenged the paramount chief on Omarakana, because they claimed their subclan of Malasi had more rights to become a paramount chief than the subclan of the Malasi that for centuries were living in Umarakana and always had the paramount chief, that is the chief of chiefs. Right? When they tried to start a fight, the chief very boldly stepped out and said, well, if you do anything now, I will whisper my specific magic. And this is a magic that controls rain. He said, if I speak this magic, you won't have any yams next year. And they tried to do, and then he started to recite the magic. And everyone was stunned. And the impact of this guy, I just managed to know him before he died, was so strong that the others went back to Sinaketa. And there was no rain. And what did the Sinaketans do? They tried to get some yams where they could get it, and pigs and things. And then the next year they came to Maracana, gave the yams and the pigs and all the other things they had tried to get in their hold to the chief, to the old paramount chief, and said, yeah, we will respect you, sorry. And he accepted the gifts, and that was the only really possible dangerous war on Kiribina that I know of. I have no idea what happened before, and before the patrol reports of the patrol officers from Australia, you have no kind of information what happened on the islands.
Well, unless I'm mistaken, in Taiwan, in this island, there have been into wars between different villages of the same communities and between different communities. But in the Auckland Island, which is only down south of this island, I never heard about any war. But this island is very small, and they have maybe 6 villages, and I never heard about, because another French colleague is working on that, and I never heard her say that there were any war in that small island. So maybe the fact that it was small or big and they needed I'm not sure whether that...
I'm being absolutely ignorant about the situation in Formosa in the old days. But here I would dare to say maybe the wars had to do not so much with the geographic length and width of the island, but with the fact that many of these tribes were headhunters.
They did. So they considered that whenever you went to kill, the person that was killed was actually given to you as a gift. So there were also a lot of, I know in some ethnic groups there has been black magic, and we hear about it in the Taiwan and the Yuma, but usually they regard the shamans as those who had, I mean, there's a lot of other traditions about it, and the way they used to kill, and there's a lot of traditions.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, anything else?
If not, I think we're going to close the session here, but I would like to ask all the professors to stay, and after having rested a little bit, we can come back and continue talking to Gunter. I would like to thank everybody, and to thank also Professor Gunter Senft for his very extremely insightful talk today.
Thank you very much.